Welcome to another edition of Around the Table with Stacey Smith. The winners of this month's past election are now preparing to assume office, while others are looking ahead to the spring primary and then the general election about a year from now. And that is what makes politics very interesting all the time. So now to talk about it, let me introduce to you our panel. And they consist of former governor of Pennsylvania, Tom Corbett, a Republican. He also served as state attorney general and also the U.S. attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Mr. Corbett now teaches law at Gainey University. Also around the table, we find Jim Byrne. Jim is a former chairman of the State Democratic Party here in Pennsylvania. He also served as president of the Allegheny County Council and as mayor of Millville. Jim right now practices law here in the city of Pittsburgh. Also an attorney in town is Joe Misty. Joe is a guiding light for a lot of Democrats. He has consulted on campaigns across the state. Joe teaches law at Duquesne University, and you can read his thoughts on politics and life in the Trib every Sunday. Not being able to join us is our regular panelist, Keith Schmidt. He had a conflict of sorts, so we'll welcome him back the next time around. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being with us here on Around the Table, Politics with Stacey Smith. So let's delve into it. Jake Corman, the Senate President Pro Tem, a Republican, announced that he is now going to run for governor. He joins what I believe are either 10 or 11 other candidates on the Republican side of the primary. That also includes the Lou Barletta, the former mayor in the eastern part of the state who ran for the United States Senate against Bob Casey and lost. So, Governor, I'm going to start with you because you had an opportunity to work with Mr. Corman. Your take on his decision to run for governor.
Well, frankly, I'm a little bit surprised by it because he sits in the position as president of the Senate right now. He's head of the Republican Party there, and that's a very powerful position. To run for governor, if he loses it, the question is he going to step down to run for governor? Is he going to step down from his leadership? And so I'm surprised that he's doing that at this point in time. However, as you said, there's 10 people in there. Who knows what's going to be the survivor of this? Every person who's running for governor in the Republican Party has to do what the Attorney General, Shapiro, has been doing for 4 years, raising money. And he's got a big head start on them. And when you have 10 people in there doing this, they're spreading out that money a great deal. He has certain benefits in his position and be able to hopefully raise money for his campaign. My one observation is, and I'm going to look to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I cannot remember the last time a member of the Pennsylvania Senate ran successfully for governor. Very difficult to run out of the General Assembly for governor. I think the last one to do that was Governor Leader from York County back in the 50s. And so I think it's very difficult. He's in a very good position where he is now and can be there for years, but he wants to make this run. So I'm waiting for the media to ask him the tough questions of why.
Okay, good. Jim, I'm going to bring you in on this one. Your comments on his decision to run, and as a former state Democratic Party chairman, if you were in that position right now, would you be licking your chops that you basically have one candidate and the other side has 10 or 11?
No, I would not be licking my chops if I were still the state Democratic Party chairman. What I would want to be doing is taking a good look at who's raising the money on the Republican Party and why. I would be looking to see who has what, where are the alliances starting to form, and I suspect the governor is right that it's probably not been since the 50s that a candidate has come out from the General Assembly. I think what Mr. Corman sees is what we all see with respect to the Republican field at this point. And what that is nobody is a front runner. Everybody thought that Mr. Parnell would get leaps and bounds ahead of the rest of that field. But based on some of the setbacks we've seen recently with what's going on with him in litigation and some of the accusations that are being made against him, he is now vulnerable, and it's going to be very difficult for him to even survive a primary. I think Mr. Corman sees an opportunity, but here's why I'm not licking my chops. That field, Mr. Corman, in a crowded field, if they're not all doing well and raising money, has enough name recognition to get through a crowded primary because of that advantage of the leadership position he has. And it's not going to matter who wins, but I think he has a shot here as far as money goes. Pennsylvania is going to be on the national radar next year. We may be the top state being watched and the top state where money's going to come in for both sides. So the governor's right. Mr. Shapiro has a significant head start, that it will not take long for the Republican nominee to catch up financially, because money's going to be coming in from all across the country for both camps by the time we get to November. And don't forget how close Josh was in his reelection against Heather Heidelbaugh. The Republicans see an opportunity here next year in a state that's going to be on the map and with an inevitable Republican surge that we expect to see in 2022.
All right. I normally introduce Joe Mystic by calling him the great philosopher, as I like to call it, of Around the Table with Stacey Smith. So, Joe, let's hear your philosophy on this one with Mr. Corman deciding to run, given the fact, of course, it will be coming from the Democratic perspective.
Well, I agree initially with Governor Corbett. In politics, there's some bad jobs, some terrible jobs, like being on the school board, for instance. It's a job where you can't win no matter what. But among the really great jobs in politics is being a Pennsylvania state senator. And if you're the leader of the Pennsylvania State Senate, some would think that becoming governor might even be a step down in terms of your ability to influence things. So that being said, if Senator Corman were to win the primary, I think we would be looking at a very spirited campaign in the general election with Josh Shapiro representing the Democratic Party, because we would then have two strong candidates, two viable candidates. But again, I don't know why you'd want to leave that Senate seat. They're pretty sweet.
And Joe, I'd comment, you'd have two legislators running for that seat, which is extremely unusual. And as we've talked about in private, it's when you're running as a legislator, you have a long history of votes that you've made on different pieces of legislation that some people are going to really like and some people are really not going to like.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Yes.
Wow. Republicans and Democrats agreeing. It's wonderful.
What's going on here?
Only here, Stacey.
It's the season. Peace on earth, goodwill towards all men. Here we are.
I guess that's where we are.
And happy Thanksgiving while we're at it.
Minneapolis voted down in this last election a defund the police measure. Pittsburgh's new mayor has said that he wants reform, but not defunding the city's police department. He wants officers to walk the beat again, as he calls it, to repair the broken relationships, as he sees it, with the community and people of color. He wants to see over-policing reduced in communities of color. So my question to all of you, and anybody can jump in right away, is Mr. Gainey trying to walk a tightrope here?
Oh, he has to walk a tightrope. He has no choice here. This is a very, very difficult issue. But let's start off by saying that defund the police may be the dumbest slogan ever spoken in politics. Nobody that I talk to, no serious person really wants to defund the police. When they're talking about police reform or criminal justice reform, really what they're saying is, maybe we should shift some of our resources elsewhere and within the criminal justice system, that is, and not defund the police or find additional resources to do other things. Now, I'm going to harken back to a time during the Maslov administration when Governor Corbett came knocking on my door and said there's a new program, a federal program, then U.S. Attorney Corbett, called Weed and Seed. And what it essentially tried to do was weed out the bad guys and then seed the neighborhoods with the kinds of social services and kinds of support that people needed to be successful in life. And I would suggest that that concept is really what Mayor-elect Gainey has to embrace, because that's what we're talking about here. He has two widely separated ends of the spectrum. There are people who supported him who want police reform, need police reform, may even be afraid of the police in their communities. And then on the other hand, you have a lot of people, and there may be some crossover here, who are fearful because violent crime's on the rise, and they want a strong police effort supported by the mayor. So he has to take those two distinct ends and bring them towards the middle. And Weed and Seed might describe exactly what he has to do.
Governor.
Sure. I think defund the police is one of the most ridiculous slogans I've ever heard. And it has been used by Republican candidates to defeat Democratic candidates for the past year since the phrase found its way into the national conversation. It doesn't work. It doesn't get people elected. And it's ridiculous to think those who take the literal meaning of that seriously. You need law enforcement in a free society to protect the rights of all people. You need a well-trained law enforcement in a free society. That's where the issue has been. For every negative story that you read about a police officer, as a former mayor, I can guarantee you that there are 1,000 positive stories that are going on with law enforcement in their communities that don't get the attention that they deserve. So, but you still have to pay attention to the problems that we have seen, some of the horrific things we have seen. It speaks to the narrative of getting law enforcement trained, weed out the rogue officers who tarnish the badge, and train those who are there and have good lines of communication, good chains of command from the rank and file officer to the sergeant, to the chief, to the mayor. And when you have that with good policies and procedures and support from law enforcement leaders like state attorney generals and federal prosecutors and local prosecutors, you have the type of law enforcement you need to keep a free society safe. That's where the conversation needs to be. And the professor and I were talking after the last segment about the mayor-elect of New York. He did not run on defund the police. He talked about ways to interface and fix the problems and the misperceptions and get rid of rogue officers and bring the communities together. I think Mr. Gainey should have a conversation with the mayor-elect of New York City and talk about his platforms. And I think there's a path there for Mr. Gainey to do the things he needs to do here in Pittsburgh.
Governor Corbett.
First off, and Joe and I talk about this in the classes we teach, the number one rule of any government is public safety. And when somebody says, well, I want to defund public safety, it makes absolutely no sense. And I don't think they really mean that. I think as Joe has indicated and as Jim has indicated, can we do public safety better, smarter? Yes, we can. One of the things that we have been doing over the last 10 years is the incorporation of body cameras. Look how many cases have been brought up by the issue of body cameras, defending police, but also showing them when they did something wrong. The technology today is allowing the police to disperse their resources to the areas where they need to be dispersed. The accumulation of data of where crimes are committed allow police chiefs to emphasize putting law enforcement officers in those areas of high crime rate. When I hear people say, well, we don't want to over police, that's a phrase I don't think they even understand what they're saying. I don't think the people that live in the communities that are over policed and who don't create any of the problems want to see law enforcement go away. It's my assumption, but you have to be very careful in using those words. Those are political catchphrases, campaign catchphrases. But when you get into the business of policing, when he picks a police chief, he's got to be very careful what he's going to do there. Because I always hear about how many people were convicted of crimes and so forth. I never hear about how many victims are there. I mean, I'm a huge victim advocate, and I'm always in there. Public safety means victim safety, less victims. And we have to make sure we're doing that as a public society.
I'll throw this back at all of you, and maybe we can just come down to some sort of agreement here. What exactly should the mayor-elect do? I know you mentioned talk to the governor, the mayor-elect of New York, et cetera, but here in Pittsburgh, the previous administration under a police chief tried to get police out back on the walking the beat and trying to develop community relations. Is that the key answer? Joe, I'll start with you.
Well, beat patrols are very attractive, and a lot of us look back on the days fondly when everybody knew the beat cop in their neighborhood. They're reassuring to the public, certainly, but it's a very, very expensive way to police. So if you're going to go that way, you better be prepared to find the money in order to finance that tactic. I think the governor's right or Jim's right that it wouldn't hurt to consult other elected officials throughout the country. This is a hot topic everywhere, not just here. So there's much to be learned from the experience of others. I'm a strong advocate of choosing your police chief from within your ranks. I think that that tends to give you tighter control and tends to give you a police force that looks more like your city or has the values of your city. I think that Mayor Gainey needs to find a police chief, and it could be Chief Schubert, but he needs to find a police chief who he knows will embrace his philosophy and will take orders. The problem that we've had with the police in the past was that the orders from the mayor's office were garbled and contradictory within 10 or 20 minutes. And that the police really didn't know, they were damned if they did or damned if they did not in any given situation on the street. So you need steady direction and you need to have faith in your police chief. At the same time, you have to remember that there are people who feel oppressed and who feel perhaps over-policed, as Tom had said, over-policed. They know what it means in those communities. They're getting hassled over relatively minor things, but sometimes the minor things mean something bigger too. So you have to try to bring those two sides towards the middle. It's a tough task that he has ahead.
When I first was elected mayor, I don't think that Mayor-elect Gainey, when he becomes Mayor Gainey, should immediately start issuing directives unless he's done his homework first, unless he has a good instant working knowledge of what that control panel looks like. And in order for him to do that, I would suggest, as the professor said, he start reaching out and having the conversations he needs to have with other mayors and others in law enforcement to see what their issues are and what type of policies and procedures and directives they have to implement their respective police departments and public safety issues. My first month on the job, when I took office in Millville, I reached out to Mayor Bill Doherty, and the governor knows these folks, Mayor Bill Doherty and Etna, and I reached out to Donnie Ferrero in Sharpsburg and Tom Smith in Blonox, and I reached out to the police chief of Shaler Township, and he sent me down a police manual that the Shaler Township used to give us some ideas of what we needed to do. We didn't have a police manual, we didn't have anything. And I spoke to the police chief that was there at the time I got elected about what was working, what wasn't, what would he like to see. These are the type of conversations Mr. Gainey's going to need to have. Now I'm talking about Millville Borough and up the Allegheny River. Now we're talking about the city of Pittsburgh. But the algorithm doesn't change. The geography does, but it's the same type of concept that Mr. Gainey needs to utilize to see where everything is, what's working, what isn't, and then start talking about a policy. Is he happy with the chief he has? Does he want to move in a different direction? Who is best equipped to work with Mayor Gainey to implement what he needs to do? And so it's going to start with a lot of conversations with situated folks around him and around this area and around the country in order for him to move forward. I'm sure those conversations, quite frankly, began even before the election in November.
All right, Governor, can you wrap it up?
Yeah, I'm just going to join in on that. I hope they began before the election. I haven't seen anything from the media as to what he has done in that regard. As governor and a lot of other areas, you put in a transition team in that period of time between the election and taking office. Right now, I would hope he has a transition team, a diverse transition team. And when I say diverse, I don't mean just by race. I mean by political background, by experience background. That are going in and taking a look at, when I say law enforcement, I also mean public safety. You've got the fire department and you got the EMTs. That is one unit that he ought to have a good team telling him, A, what do they find? What are the weaknesses? What are the strengths? B, who are some of the people I might be able to bring in or attract? And C, what do I need to do in my first 6 months, the second 6 months, and the next 3 years?
All right, moving back to politics if we can. Steve Irwin, an attorney who used to work for Arlen Specter, describes himself as a pragmatist. Arlen Specter, of course, was a Republican who turned Democrat in his last couple of years in office. Mr. Irwin is a Democrat. He has joined the field of Democratic candidates who want to succeed Mike Doyle as congressman. 2 progressives have already filed. So which way will the Democrats go in the primary? Jim, I'll start with you.
Sure. And again, by way of full disclosure, I endorsed Jerry Dickinson and I've been advising that campaign. But Mr. Irwin gets into this race after running a year as a potential candidate for lieutenant governor in the 2022 cycle. Now he gets into this race. Steve's a great lawyer. He's been involved in the party for many, many years. He has connections to Harrisburg and to Philadelphia through the work he's done as an attorney and as a consultant. But to hit the ground running at this point, we've talked about this before. The names of the two current candidates, Jerry Dickinson and Summer Lee, even though Summer only recently announced, have been floated in this congressional conversation for years. And Jerry's already run once. I don't know where Steve's going to have the ability right now to get the money, the adequate enough money that he needs raised, the infrastructure around him to go out and start the grassroots work that needs to be done, that the two already announced candidates have started. You're past a quarter turn, maybe to the halfway turn at this point in that congressional race. I don't know if he has the name recognition, the ability to raise the money, or what's needed to catch up to the other two. I still think the advantage lies with the candidates that are already in the race.
Joe.
Well, Steve Irwin is a serious candidate. I think that he's going to present himself as an alternative for those people who do not want to see the party swinging too far to the left. We've seen some recent signs that that's probably not good for the future of the party. So he'll present himself as a centrist, a reasonable person who's looking for practical solutions. And I think he'll start raising some money now, because those people who are longing for that candidates who hold that center ground will be relatively generous.
Governor?
Well, we have not addressed, and it makes sense. You have candidates that are going out there running for a seat that has been for years traditionally Democrat. Last time it was Republican, it was a congressman by the name of Hines. Before that, it was congressman by the name of Corbett, no relationship. But there is a little fly in the ointment for everybody, and that's called redistricting. And we don't know what that district's going to look like at this point in time. We're losing a seat in Congress across Pennsylvania. Where is that movement going to cause those seats to move? Connor Lamb is not running, so there's an open area over there. So you don't know what the boundaries of the district are going to be. More likely than not, it's going to be a heavily Democrat seat at this point in time. But if I were investing right now, I'd probably hold my money back to see who's going to do better in one district or another. If Republicans win that seat, the Democrats have had a very bad night in 2022.
Any chance of that happening, Jim?
No, but believe me, all the crystal balls are showing a lot of positive trends for the Republican Party in 2022 across the nation. The Democratic state party, the Democratic county parties, the gubernatorial nominee for the Democrats, they all need to be prepared to work very, very hard against this push that is inevitable in off-year elections when the Democrat holds the White House. There were warning signs 2 weeks ago. 3 or 4 statewide seats went to the R's. So they're going to need to do their homework. But as good of a night as they're hoping to have, it would be raining cats and dogs if they were to win this congressional seat.
Okay, good. Talking about swings and how things have gone, the president did score a victory in passage of the infrastructure bill, but his job approval rating continues to slip and to decline. He's 10 points underwater at the last check I had. Is it too early for his administration to be worrying about this kind of polling, or should they worry about this with the midterms coming up? Governor, I'll start with you.
That's a good question. I think it's very early at this point in time. And, he came in with much higher expectations, but he came into something that was very difficult. We're still dealing with the pandemic. We have supply chain problems that really are no fault of him or even the government at this point in time. So people are looking at that, but he's had a lot of, stutter steps that he didn't need to make along the way. And I find it interesting to see how the media now, especially the media from middle to left, is starting to expose that more than they would have in the past. But I also think the question in his mind, and it'd be nice if he would share it, but he's not going to do that, is he going to run again in 4 years? If he's not running again in 4 years and he already knows it internally, then I don't think he cares where his numbers are right now. If that's the case, he has the opportunity to make some very bold, tough decisions and to show some vision. And I don't think he's ready to do that because I think he still thinks he's going to run in 4 years.
Joe,
Yeah, my money says that President Biden does not run again, and Donald Trump does not run for office second time around. I think we'll end up with some new faces, some new candidates in both parties running at the head of the ticket. Now, we have to take a breath here. We are an instant gratification society. Joe Biden took office in the midst of an unprecedented worldwide pandemic. Our economy has been essentially shut down. In 6 or 8 months, or 10 months, or 12 months, year and a half, you probably can't turn this thing around, but you can make some strides, great strides. I think his recent infrastructure bill passage is tremendous progress. They have to get that money out fast. They have to find shovel-ready projects around the country, especially in critical states where if they can get these things going, it will have a positive impact on the midterm elections. But this is the nature of life historically. I can't think of anyone who's entered the White House at a worse time, and it's going to take a while to turn the nation around.
Jim.
I think it was a bad time for Mr. Biden to take office. I think Barack Obama coming in 08, 09 was a very bad time. FDR, very, very bad time. Lincoln, very, very bad time. But this one's comparable. It's definitely comparable. But you're right, Professor. It's an instant gratification society in which we now live. And isn't it funny how the speed with which we get our information, which began to exponentially increase in the 90s, seems to follow the same path of the speed with which the balance of power in Congress goes back and forth. It used to be decades when a party was in power and they would hold it. And then with the contract with America that Mr. Gingrich put forth at the same time the information age began to speed up, the Republicans had control. And that was for a few cycles. But now it could be cycle to cycle when you see the power switching. So the intermittent gratification, the immediate gratification is working negatively against this president. People thought when he came in, the pandemic would be over. People would be back to work again. Many now just don't want to go back. There's frustration, there's angst, there's COVID burnout. That's definitely a factor here. But there are some things he's done wrong or mistakes and gaffes he's made that the governor pointed out. And let's not forget the bipartisan criticism he faced for the tactics and the methods with which he removed us from the Afghan theater. So you have that as well. Now, having said all that, it's way too soon to use these negative numbers against him or against the Democratic Party and its field of candidates next year. Let's not forget the historic significance of a bipartisan, keyword, bipartisan infrastructure bill that this country has needed since the Marshall Plan of Europe after World War II. This is going to start to show a positive impact on this country. And it will be also given an opportunity to the moderates on both sides to show what happens when we get back to the days of Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill coming together, compromising for the betterment of the republic. This is the first piece of significant historic legislation that I can remember seeing ever since the Newt Gingrich contract with America in a toxic national political climate where both sides compromised to get this done. It hurts the radicals on the right of the GOP who couldn't stop it. It hurts the radicals on the left of the Democratic Party who voted against it and couldn't prevent it from happening. Maybe this is the beginning of a civil conversation in the Beltway again about getting things done. And if that does happen and we start seeing positivity from the enactment of this legislation, you're going to see those numbers start to go up in time for us to avoid a red surge, which the GOP is licking their chops for next year.
I have to say this, and I'm glad you brought it up about Afghanistan. If you take a look at the numbers for positive and negative as far as job approval, they started to go under water for the president after the Afghanistan withdrawal. Finally, one very quick question. We have about 30 seconds left. Will the Build Back Better bill make it not only through the House, but through the Senate? And will he be able to announce a victory on that one? Governor, your thought?
I don't believe so. It may be watered down, but as it is right now, and as you know, nobody really knows what all's in there. The bill's too big. I don't see that getting past the Senate at this point.
Joe,
Well, I think he'll get something, but if he does not get certain things, look for that to be used politically as a weapon against those who opposed it, because there's some very vital legislation there for families.
Jim, about 10 seconds.
Yeah, big win with the infrastructure. This would be a bigger win. I agree with the professor. You vote against this after the infrastructure bill, it's going to be used against you for voting against it.
All right, I want to thank all of you once again for joining us here on Around the Table with Stacy Smith, to Governor Corbett, Joe Mystic, and Jim Byrne. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again the next time for Around the Table with Stacy Smith. Thanks.
Thanksgiving.
Thank you.